thanks Doug for being here to share your travels in Africa. I'm sure that's a place that a lot of us would like to go, for those of us that haven't been there. So with that, Doug, take it away and tell us all about your adventure.
Okay, happy to do that. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I think in that big audience is our dear friends, Bob Lawrence and Sue Swaderer. That's the couple that went with Sharon and I on this magical trip in May and June of 2018. Bob and Sue are real birders. I'm pretty much an amateur, but together we took an amazing lot of photos. Many of these I took, but many of them Bob took as well. The ones I took were with a Nikon camera with a 300 millimeter zoom lens. So just quickly, this map, which was, the picture was taken in an airport in Kenya, shows you up in the right-hand corner, mostly Kenya and Tanzania to the south. And you can see those two countries border on the Indian Ocean. So we're in Eastern Central Africa. In the inner part of those two countries are two very large national parks and reserves. The Masai Mara in the center of this big picture is in Kenya, the Masai Mara, and the Serengeti National Park is in Tanzania. And if you look at the bottom, you can see that green area in the lower left. You can see how large the Serengeti Park is in total. And that border, which includes the Mara River, is a part of where this huge annual wildebeest migration takes place along with zebras. Something like a couple million or so of these wildebeest go south and back north through the seasons to find water and food. And a whole lot of zebras go with them. And we're told that when they get to the birthing spot, which I think is in Tanzania, something like 6,000 babies are dropped a day during the breeding season. So you can imagine the size of this herd. So that's where we are, and we're going to go from there. You can't go to Africa without enjoying a few pictures of the animals. We were close to this guy in our Land Rovers, but it was the lens that got me this close to him. And that's Dad, and not too far away were a couple of his lady friends and a whole lot of cubs that we may run into near the end of the presentation. This story about this lioness is interesting. She's on the top of about a 12-foot high boulder. She was sound asleep when we arrived, and by the time she woke up, there were at least 8 or 10 Land Rovers circling this boulder, all waiting for some action. Her action was to wake up and pose for us a little bit and then prepare to go back to sleep. So she obviously was used to being entertained, and we think she was probably on the Screen Actor Guild role and was getting paid for her services. But it was a beautiful thing to see, but we always wondered why she was so calm about it all. This leopard is sound asleep in a tree. What you don't see is hanging down in this tree is the carcass, half-eaten, of a modest-sized antelope. But we just wondered, how did he get so comfortable laying like that in the uncomfortable position he's in amongst the tree limbs? These elephants are about 100 feet outside a Four Seasons hotel we stayed at in the middle of the Serengeti with nothing around, just this hotel and barren land and the typical local area. They come most nights and drink out of this pond and then go off into into somewhere where they sleep. It was just amazing to see the family, and you were almost as close as you would be in a zoo. This rhino, you got to see a rhino. This is what's called a white rhino. They're not white, but they have a flat, very wide mouth. and they spend their whole day eating grass. The regular rhino has a more typical mouth and they eat leaves. Why the difference, we don't know, but to feed this animal, he or she would have to eat continuously, I think, to survive. And one last animal, and we'll get on to the birds. You might think these two are hugging each other, but if you look closely, they're both males. So we're not sure what's going on here. But we saw this a couple of times with the giraffes with their articulated necks, and they would flop over each other, we assume in some sense of endearment and camaraderie. So it was quite an experience to see. This is the Masai Mara. This is the kind of scenery we were in a lot of the time. These trees are topped like that because the animals, in particular the elephants, have eaten everything below them. And those are wildebeests, and that just gives you the idea of the terrain we were traveling through. And this is similar terrain at night. So there are modest tall hills around that control the scenery and the beauty of it. And that's kind of the territory in which we were. So this was the picture that was in the paper. These are called gray-crowned cranes. They do fly, but for the most part, they're on the ground. They're 3 to 4 foot tall, 6 foot wingspans. We saw a really tiny baby, so we are guessing this one's more than a few weeks old, but it is a family parading across the ground, and we saw them everywhere. They're quite common and very distinctive. You begin to get a sense of the color that's coming your way. And it's nice to know that the blue heron is everywhere in the world, including right here on a wet part of our tour, but they're out there every place we go. This guy is one of 6 species of eagles that are in this part of Africa. It's called a martial eagle. It has about a 6 foot wingspan, and it is up there dining on something it had caught. But it's quite a magnificent bird. We didn't really get to see it flying, but it's quite interesting and much different than our American eagle. This is a auger buzzard, totally black with a white beak. We assume sitting up there just waiting for the wrong creature to come by to feed itself. This picture is a lappet-faced vulture. They're about 4 foot high, 6.5 foot wingspan. And you'll see in the next picture, they have a red head. That's one of 4 or 5 types of vultures, and it is the biggest one.
If you want it, he's in Africa.
Yes? Did I miss something? This is a similar vulture. You can see the bit of red head that confirms that it's a lappet face. This is one of about 8 pictures we quickly took. That eagle, which is a tawny eagle, was in a bit of a dogfight with this vulture. So they must have been fighting over something on the ground. And this is the clearest picture of the two. And you can see that the tawny eagle isn't quite the size of the vulture, but for some reason was chasing it off and would dive at it, literally make a dive into it to try to scare it away. These flamingos, the white ones are called, I think it's called a grand flamingo, and the others are called the lesser flamingo, the pink ones. And these 4 that you see with their legs extended were actually landing at the moment. And as they land, they kind of walk across the water until they settle down in to the water space. And this guy's taking off. He's charging forward, and I don't think they walk on water, but you almost think they are. It was quite something to see them. In the background, there's probably 1,000 of them floating around in this pond or standing around having a party of some sort. This guy looks like he's been around many a year, maybe many a century. It's a white stork, and he was parading the grounds of the Fairmont Hotel in Kenya. And he just sort of would wander around looking for somebody to pay attention to, but nobody wanted to feed him. I think it's probably the size of the beak. And we couldn't identify him more as to his unique facial coloring and lack of feathers on his neck, but it's the big white stork of Africa. And this is a sacred ibis. And the belief is that this bird goes back a couple thousand years into the Egyptian world of centuries ago. And it was also parading around the grounds of the Fairmont Hotel. So you just never know where these guys can hang out, I guess, and they're well cared for. This is a silver-cheeked Kosk hornbill. You probably know, but the Kosk refers to the bit of crown on the top of his beak and his head. They aren't really large birds. This one might be the size of a crow, but very, very unusual in their design, I guess you would say. And this colorful guy is also a hornbill. He's called the Van der Deckens. So some Dutch or German guy got the right to, or a lady, to name this bird somewhere in the past. And again, he would probably be the size of a small crow. While this bird may not look too big to you, it is supposed to be the largest flying bird in Africa. It's called the Kori bustard. We were pretty far away, and then I've zoomed this up, so he's a little foggy, a little fuzzy. He's not very colorful, like what you're going to see here shortly, but an interesting guy who I guess spends quite a bit of time on land, but when it flies is quite a large and impressive bird with an unusual head, it seems like, if you look at the back of his crown. Oops, wrong way. And this is a helmeted guinea fowl. I don't think we have any guinea fowls in North America that have quite that much color on their head or the unique crown. He was hiding in the woods a little bit in the trees, but we did get his head. So we're going to switch to some small birds, and the color will start to show up. All of us know what a European starling looks like, and we joyfully think of the little bit of glowing blue that's on the side of its head. This is called the superb starling, and it just glistens like that. The color is very intense. I think in the book, there are 4 or 5 other starlings that are found throughout Africa. But this one seems to be the most colorful, and I guess that's why it's called the superb. And this is the same type of bird who had just come in for a landing. I thought it was kind of a lucky photograph to get. You don't usually see them in that kind of a state of flying. And here is one of the other starlings. This is called Hildebrandt's starling. Very intense yellow eyes and the sort of orangey brown breast and belly. And that's another one down on the bottom of the photo, but seems to be focused on something with the intenseness. This guy is a gray-headed kingfisher. They eat insects, and I guess you'd say there's at least 4 or 5 colors in his makeup, and you will see some others with as many colors in them. These are small birds, blue jay size and down. All the ones you're seeing now, none of them are really very big. And I thought his big long beak probably relates to the kingfisher name. They do have pigeons. This is simply called the African green pigeon. It likes to eat fruit hanging in the tree of different kinds. I suppose this is some kind of a fruit tree. I didn't get a chance to determine that. I've just never seen a pigeon that's other than gray or gray and a little bit of black spotted. I don't know if any of you have, but I thought he was a quite handsome bird, and really the size of a North American pigeon, just unique to its land. In the color when I read said it may go way back in time to what they eat. This is the African version of our mourning dove. Again, a little more colorful, but as African birds go, kind of ordinary in terms of its coloring. I think the black scarf or whatever you would call that around the back of his neck is quite interesting. And the darkish sort of reddy purple that surrounds his eye makes him pretty distinctive. This guy is a pintail whydah, W-H-Y-D-A-H. Now he may look pretty big, but the bird itself is about 5 inches, which makes the tail feathers about 10 inches in length. So an unusual small bird that we stumbled across. And at this point, you probably wonder how we identify all of these birds. Well, we had a great book, Bob and I, and Sue and Sharon, and we had these even better guides. And they would pick the bird out before we could even point our camera at it. They were really very, very good at what they did and were really helpful, because none of these had we seen before, and the odds are none of them will we see again. This is an African specs weaver. Many of these birds, and they nest together. That's the bird, and that's where they nest, in these very spiky trees. And they make these little hanging nests. You can see some sort of round, large softball type shapes in there. Those are the nests that they build and breed in. And they will all cluster in a single tree together. And how they get in and out of all those little pricklers, we're not sure, but we saw one of those trees. There had to be 25 of the birds fluttering around inside of all the structure of the bird. This colorful guy, who has again 5 or 6 colors in him, is a white-fronted bee eater. And there are numerous versions of the bee eater species throughout Africa, we learned. Fortunately, we got to see him because, again, I think you can see maybe it's 7 colors on that bird. Blue, gray, couple kinds of green, the orange and the dark orange and the white. Pretty fascinating. We just don't get to see those. Even if you go into Florida, you don't quite see anything with that much color. And this little guy is a lilac-breasted roller, and he was quite small, maybe sparrow size, a little bit bigger than that. And his colors are all kind of muted, unlike the brightness of the last one. Thought a very, very distinguished little creature. And this is an oxpecker. It is yellow-billed oxpecker, and they, maybe I'm one ahead of me, excuse me. I'm ahead of myself. This is the African yellow white-eye. The next one is the oxpecker that rides around on the back of water buffaloes. So this is, again, the African yellow white-eye, and small, and we would see those in groups as well. So this is the back of a water buffalo, and those 2 guys up there, maybe male and female, are yellow-billed oxpeckers. And they live by eating the insects that are attracted to the cows, and occasionally, I guess, they go somewhere else for a drink of water, but they get a free ride around the desert. This cute guy is a red-collared widow bird. What makes he or she a widow, we're not sure. But I thought the bright red chest and the dark blue crown on his head were just kind of fascinating colors. And how they come about, only the good Lord and Mother Nature knows. And here's a different one with red and some speckling stripes. This is called, even though it's not white, it's called a white-headed mouse bird. And the head does look a little, if you get close, it does look a little bit like the head of a mouse. Again, pretty interesting creature. This is called a white-bellied, well, maybe I went ahead of myself again. Just a minute. Let me go back. This is called this is the mouse bird. I was wrong by one. I'm sorry about that. This is the mouse bird and with the very, very long tail feathers. And this is a white-bellied canary. So the little birds that we used to have as children in our cages that came from South America, they exist across the Atlantic and Africa as well. These are Denard's barbets. Again, a very interesting bird with the crown and a great deal of the orange feathering from neck all the way down into its tail. And again, a bird's probably, as I recall, 6 or 7 inches in length. This guy is known as a rufous-naped lark, or it might be the fawn-colored lark, one of the two, that has a really interesting structure to him. It's almost like his head is little botches of hair as opposed to feathers, and kind of a cute guy. This is just to prove that there are some birds in Africa that are sort of North American in their color tones. Not a lot of brightness to this guy, but he was out there on this rock and we just snapped his picture. This is the African wattled plover. Mostly a ground bird. We saw a couple other plovers during the trip. Again, I thought the beak and markings, facial markings are really interesting. And if you look closely, the orange yellow goes out and goes around the eye, outlines the eye in its structure with the yellow legs. It's just, you just have to wonder how these develop with all this color over time. This is, I'm pretty sure this is the African janka. And I think this is the bird I wrote down that the females are polyandrous, and that the males do all the work to raise the young. So these ladies get around with whomever and whenever they want, and that's allowed apparently. So it was just an interesting sidelight to one of the birds with a sort of an interesting life structure. This little guy, and he wasn't very big, maybe 6-8 inches tall at the most, is called a collared pratincole, Pratincole. There's a couple like it, and obviously the collar comes from the softer color under his beak and around his neck. He almost looks like he's standing up to march, more like a pelican or something in shape than he does like a flying bird. Pretty focused guy and looking for dinner, I suspect. This little one is called a silverbird, I assume because of its back feathers. And it has, again, a very feathery, soft underbelly and chest structure, breast structure. Again, maybe the size of a sparrow. Even though there's no apparent red, this is a southern red bishop. We saw a few of these, and again, Interesting. The colors on the back side, the black's on the underside this time. Again, just Mother Nature at its best. This is one of the last couple here. This is a rosy-throated long claw. You can see the length of its claws on the where it's on the post it's on, and the little rosy throat. Otherwise fairly brown, but those are, for its size, pretty long, long claws. And this guy who shows very black is a member of the finch family, so it's not very big, called an indigo bird, with a really, really white beak and bill, which we thought was sort of stands out in the yellow legs. And a couple of quick things that to finish up, and then if there's any questions, I'll stumble through them if I can, or maybe Bob can help. Even the lizards have multicolors in Africa. This guy is at least 3, maybe 4 colors, and a lizard crawling along a rock somewhere along the way. Looks like a typical lizard. I don't recall how big he was, but I thought the pink part in particular was very, very colorful, very intense colors. And these guys are some kittens, and I'm hoping I can get this to come up, and it's a little video, but maybe it won't do that because we're in Zoom. But they were all on their way to see their 2 moms. Here we go. And I just thought it's kind of a cute venture. The average dog or kitten in there is about the size of our former golden retriever, but they're still very young. See the little guy running along there? Most lioness have 2 or 3 at a time, might have 2 litters over a year where they're still there. We did see a time where there were 2 lioness and about 8 cubs, and the cubs were just climbing all over their mothers, just like kittens would all over a mother cat. The dad was about 400 yards away, watching out over his family, I think, at the time. So hope that's good. About 30 minutes of pictures, and I hope some of them were quite striking for you. If there's questions, I guess we can take them. That's it.
Thanks a lot, Doug. That was a really great set of pictures. I was wondering, I saw there was one question on the chat about the time of your trip, time of year. I was wondering if you could tell us some more details about your trip, like, you know, the
Sure.
travel arrangements and lodging and what a typical day was like and that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, we went in late May into early June. We chose that time because it's good temperature wise, and then it's before families start to go, so that we thought we would be in a group that's mostly adult, and we were. The tour company was TAUC, T-A-U-C-K. We started in Tanzania and finished in Kenya, flew home from Nairobi. We got there by flying to Brussels, where we stayed a couple of days. And then you fly down straight, because at that point, you're not doing any more time zone changes. Eastern Africa's pretty aligned with Europe for time zone. 7 or 8 hour flight from Brussels down into Tanzania. I can't remember that. We didn't go to the main city. There's a second one that's very close to this, where most of the tours come in. There were about 15 of us. I think there were 3 Land Rovers, 3 or 4 that typical of safari vehicles you have seen. And there would be 4 or 5 of us in each vehicle during the day. So many times we started pretty early in the morning and would be out until dusk would start to set in. Got treated to some picnics, a balloon ride, but for the most part, we were never out of our Amsterdam, not Brussels. Sorry, Amsterdam. My wife came down to remind me where we went to. we were seldom out of our vehicles. A couple of stops where lunch was served, and it was sort of known that the animals were safe by, but otherwise you stayed put in your Toyota or Land Rover vehicle, which was open, had an open top so you could stand up and take photos. The guides had walkie-talkies so they could talk to each other, really to each other and other tour groups. So if somebody saw something very exciting, they quickly shared it across the different tour companies. We would stay, I think in the 10 nights, 10, 11 nights, we were in 5 different lodges. So we moved, as you moved through, you moved with you. We were allowed to bring one big duffel bag of clothes and a carry bag. The duffel bag was supplied to us so that we knew what the limit of size was in terms of what we could bring along some of the hops. We did some travel by plane from one lodge to the next a couple of times. Food was pretty good. We ate as a group. Many days were tiring, but you just saw something fascinating every day, and numerous fascinating things along the way, and met some really, really interesting people. And again, I think the tour guides, all of who were natives, of course, they had their huge books. There's something like 1,400 species of birds in this part of Eastern Africa. We saw 150 of them. So although we were amazed that we saw 150 birds to record in our dream book, we found out it was only maybe 10 or 12% of what we could have seen if we would cover much more of the countryside. Anything else I can comment on?
Doug, it's Lynn again. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I've been fortunate enough to go to Africa twice. The last time in 2019 when they had that brown spot polka dotted zebra that went viral. But your explanation of Africa was just wonderful. It was always my grandmother's favorite place on the planet, and she inspired me as a child to go. But you told really good tales about the birds you saw. Thank you so very much for sharing.
Well, happy to do that. And, if somebody wants one of these photos, I'd be happy to send them to them. They're just amazing when you see this color, especially on the smaller birds. And yet it's so distinct and for the most part, very vibrant colorage. Very lucky thing to see.
Doug, I see there's a couple of questions that people wrote in the chat room. One of them from John Shreves, he asked, was this primarily a birding tour or an animal tour? He thought it was a very nice mixture.
Well, it's primarily an animal tour for most people who were in our group. It's just that because our good friends with us, Bob and Sue, who are right now are in Texas birding, our interest and my modest interest in birding and my wife's, we finagled trying to figure out who the best guide was about birds. We figured that out in a day. And then we begged and borrowed our way into his vehicle every morning by getting up earlier. And so we turned it into a combination. I think most people would go for the animals. And I took probably 2,000 pictures in 10 days. And I think at one time, Bob thought he'd taken like 3,500 pictures with his camera, which was a different variety. And out of that, we try to find 150 that are exciting to keep looking at. We put in a book. And most of those were probably animal pictures. We saw lions 3 or 4 times. We saw elephants very, very often, lots of antelope that aren't here. We had the privilege of going to a rescue preserve that's in Kenya. I'm sure most of us would remember the actor William Holden. He was famous for having a game hotel in Kenya It's now the Fairmont, where we stayed. And he and his lady friend, Stephanie something, my wife would be here shooting me for not remembering, they sponsored this, I guess it was his lady friend. They sponsored this beginning of this rescue, animal rescue that we went to. There were cheetahs there were all sorts of few animals we didn't get to see. A land tortoise, which was about 3.5 feet across, and they thought 150 years old. A lot of animals that they rescue and care for. And so that was kind of an exciting part of it. That's the hotel where the ibis and the stork were wandering around on the grass. So a lot of different encounters. I mean, this Four Seasons that we stayed at, I don't know that every tour group uses, but there's nothing around it. You cannot imagine. I think by car or vehicle, it wouldn't be a car, it would be by a truck or vehicle, you're probably 2 hours from anything. They fly food in to a landing strip, and how they ever build it, I don't know, because you'd have to haul all that steel and structure in to build a modern sort of very contemporary single level room spreading out in wings. But it was fascinating that they could create that and create the water system to support a wonderful hotel. Anything else? You said there were a couple of questions.
I see that Lisa wrote a question. What was your most memorable point of the trip?
Oh, wow. That would be the first day and every day until the end, I think. I think probably getting really close to me was getting really close to the lions late when we were able to take these little videos. We have 2 or 3 of these. So that was a really exciting part. And I was just every day was something new and something the same, but in a different setting. And in the beginning, we didn't pay too much attention to the scenery, but by the second or third day, you realized, although the scenery was relatively flat land and the like, it was very, very beautiful in its own way. We did spend a day or half a day with, what do you think our most exciting thing was?
Well, we
Sharon?
were taken to see Queen Elizabeth and
Oh, at the very end.
endangered rhinos
Yeah.
that are guarded 24/7.
At the very end, there are 2 things I'd tell you about. First, we went to a village of the Masai, which are native people that go way back, that still live in a native village fashion. Some of them also live in the communities around, but they live in these sort of mud huts with inside a wall where there'd be 5 or 6 families live together with their farm animals. And so we spent some time, interesting enough, the chief, handsome guy who wanted his picture taken with my wife. I should have that picture because he's giving her, well, he says he has his big arm around her shoulders. But it was fascinating to learn from these people, and they do lots of beading and decorating. At the very end, the last night, we were in Kenya. We were taken and allowed to get out of our vehicles about 5 o'clock at night. And we were 20 to 30 feet away from 2 of the last living northern white rhinos. One was called Queen Elizabeth, and the other was Kofi Annan. And I say one of the last because the last male died. There are 2 groups of white rhinos. There's a southern group, there's still a fair number, but there's the white northern ones, the northern white ones are dying off.
Guarded 24/7.
And so these 2 were guarded 24 hours a day. And by guards, I mean with rifles, because rhinos are still poached where they can. And the goal is to keep these 2 females alive while they figure out how to figure out the right cocktail to continue the breed through their system. But that was really quite a thing. We could almost reach out and touch these big guys. And it turns out that rhinos and hippos are 2 of the fastest moving large animals in their first 20, 30 yards. You really don't want to get too excited. and stir them up. They move very quickly and they are very big. Anything else?
Okay, well, not hearing any other questions. Doug, thank you very much. That was really an excellent program, great photography, and I'm glad we got all the bugs worked out of the technology. So thanks for persevering on that.
Absolutely. I didn't want to not show up. So I'm glad people enjoyed it. It's just a really unique and different opportunity to,
Once in a lifetime.
yeah, to share things. And for us, it was a once in a lifetime trip. So if you ever get a chance, you should do it.
All right, well, thanks everybody for joining in. Again, it was a great turnout. I saw 38 participants at one point. So that's really good, better than we usually get for in-person programs, which isn't surprising, I guess, on a winter night. It's nice to be able to stay home and see all this from the comfort of our home. That's one benefit. So tune in next month, everybody, for the program about forest management for wildlife, and post some of your sightings on the Petoskey Audubon Google groups. What's that? And pay your dues, yes. So like Cynthia said she would put something on the Google groups about that, where to send it in. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks again, Doug. And until next time,
pleasure.
good night.
Night.